Leavenworth, Washington, Christmas Eve, 8:22 p.m. The entire town sparkled beneath fresh snow. Strings of warm white lights stretched across every street. Christmas music drifted through the market. Children laughed as they chased each other between decorated pine trees. Couples carried steaming cups of hot chocolate through the crowded square. And somewhere in the middle of all the holiday magic, Ruby Collins was running entirely too fast. "Excuse me. So sorry. I promise I'm not usually this chaotic." She clutched a vintage Polaroid camera in one hand while trying to balance a paper bag of Christmas ornaments in the other. Her students had begged her to photograph the annual Christmas tree lighting. She was already late. If she missed the countdown, 24 disappointed second graders would never forgive her. She darted around one family, avoided a stroller, slipped slightly on fresh snow, recovered, smiled proudly, then, thud. She walked directly into someone. The impact wasn't painful, just spectacularly embarrassing. 2 large cups of hot chocolate launched into the air. Time seemed to slow. One cup flipped twice before exploding across the snow. The second landed upside down near Ruby's boots. Silence. Ruby slowly looked down, then up. Standing in front of her was a tall man wearing a dark green firefighter jacket, his hands now completely empty. They stared at the chocolate-covered snow, then at each other. Ruby sighed dramatically. "Oh," she covered her face. "I think Christmas officially hates me." The man looked at the ruined drinks, then at her. His mouth twitched. "I'm going to need compensation." Ruby blinked. "I'm buying." He glanced toward the empty cups. "You owe me too." She laughed. "That's fair. I accept full responsibility. You sound like you've done this before." "I once knocked over an entire wedding cake." He raised an eyebrow. "Accidentally?" Ruby hesitated. "Mostly." For one perfect moment, they both laughed. Then the church bells echoed across the square. At exactly the same time, the radio clipped to the man's shoulder crackled loudly. "Engine 4. Structure fire. Possible occupants inside." His smile disappeared. "Not completely. Just enough for responsibility to replace amusement." He pressed the button on the radio. "Copy. I'm responding." Ruby suddenly noticed the department badge on his jacket. Firefighter. He took one step backward. "I'm sorry. I have to go." "I know." He turned. Ruby instinctively called after him. "Wait," he looked back. "I don't even know your name." Snow drifted gently between them. He smiled again. "Maybe next time." Then he was gone, running toward flashing lights instead of Christmas lights. Ruby watched until he disappeared around the corner. Only then did she notice something glittering in the snow. A tiny silver Christmas bell. It had broken loose from the zipper of his jacket when they collided. She bent down and carefully picked it up. It was beautifully made, simple, tiny enough to fit inside her palm. She smiled to herself. "Well, I guess I owe someone more than hot chocolate now." Ruby Collins was 24 years old. She taught art to elementary school children who believed glitter counted as a legitimate school supply. To Ruby, it absolutely did. She loved color, she loved laughter, and loved making people smile. Most of all, she loved Christmas. Her apartment looked like December had exploded inside it. Tiny trees, holiday pillows, snowflake lights, 3 different advent calendars. Her best friend, Olivia, claimed Ruby celebrated Christmas with Olympic-level commitment. Ruby considered that a compliment. The only thing she loved almost as much as Christmas was finding beauty in ordinary moments. That explained the Polaroid camera she carried almost everywhere. She believed memories looked better when they weren't perfect. Mason Reed was 29, a firefighter with Leavenworth Fire and Rescue, calm under pressure, quiet without being distant. The kind of man who listened more than he spoke. Every Christmas Eve, while everyone else exchanged gifts, he worked. House fires didn't pause for holidays. Car accidents ignored calendars. Emergencies never cared what day it was. He had long accepted that Christmas belonged to everyone else. His gift each year was helping people make it safely home. 3 days after Christmas, Ruby found herself staring at the tiny silver bell again. She had planned to drop it off at the fire station. Instead, she placed it carefully inside the pocket of her camera bag. "I'll return it next time." Olivia watched her from across the living room. "You honestly think you'll see him again?" Ruby shrugged. It's a small town. During Christmas? Ruby smiled. Exactly. Olivia laughed. You don't even know his name. I know, but I know he drinks hot chocolate. You've officially become impossible. Life moved forward. Winter faded into spring. Spring became summer. Ruby accidentally glued glitter onto her principal's shoes. One of her students painted a portrait of her that looked suspiciously like a squirrel. She laughed through all of it. Whenever something ridiculous happened, she somehow found herself thinking, Firefighter Guy would have laughed at this. She didn't know why. She just did. By the time December returned, Leavenworth looked magical once again. Ruby arrived at the Christmas market much earlier this time. No running, she reminded herself. No collisions. No disasters. She had barely taken 10 careful steps when someone bumped into her shoulder. Her hot chocolate tilted dangerously. Strong hands caught the cup before disaster struck. She looked up. You've got to be kidding. The firefighter smiled. I believe that's my line. Ruby laughed so loudly that several nearby shoppers turned to look. You remembered me. You destroyed 2 perfectly innocent cups of hot chocolate. That's fair. I remember all major disasters. She pretended to look offended. I've had an entire year to improve. So have I. How? I've learned to stand farther away. She laughed again. You know, I still owe you. You do. Would 1 hot chocolate cover 2-year interest? I'll allow it. They walked together through the Christmas market, carrying fresh drinks. This time, neither of them seemed to be in a hurry. Ruby pointed toward a giant inflatable snowman. I think he's judging me. He probably saw what happened last year. She gasped dramatically. So the snowman is gossiping now? I wouldn't rule it out. She laughed. I've decided something. What? I'm never carrying 2 drinks again. Excellent strategy. You inspired it. I feel honored. They stopped beside the enormous Christmas tree in the center of the square. For a few quiet moments, neither of them said anything. Snow drifted softly around them. Children laughed nearby. A violinist played Silent Night. It felt strangely comfortable, as though continuing a conversation they had paused only yesterday instead of a year ago. Ruby smiled. So, I've been carrying something for you. She reached into her camera bag, pulled out the tiny silver Christmas bell. I think this belongs to you. He looked genuinely surprised. You kept it? I was going to return it. 12 months ago? I got distracted. He accepted the little bell carefully. His smile softened. My mom gave me this. I've had it since I became a firefighter. Ruby looked relieved. I'm really glad I didn't lose it. So am I. He carefully clipped it back onto his jacket zipper. It jingled softly. For reasons neither of them could explain, that tiny sound made them both smile. Then, the radio crackled once again. Engine 4. Vehicle accident. Respond immediately. They both closed their eyes. Then laughed at exactly the same time. Ruby pointed toward the radio. I don't like that thing. I've noticed. He began backing away. I'm sorry. Ruby smiled. I know. You have people waiting. He nodded. I'll make it up to you. How? He grinned. Next time. Before she could answer, he was already running toward another waiting fire engine. Ruby watched until he disappeared once more. She laughed quietly to herself. 2 Christmases, 2 meetings, 5 minutes each, and somehow, those 10 minutes had become her favorite part of the holidays. She had no idea when she would see him again. But for the first time, she found herself looking forward not just to Christmas, she was looking forward to next time. February arrived quietly. The Christmas lights disappeared from Leavenworth streets, replaced by strings of red hearts hanging from shop windows. The annual Valentine Festival filled the little town with music, flower stands, couples posing for photographs, and cafes competing to create the most extravagant hot chocolate in Washington. Ruby wasn't there for Valentine's Day. At least, that was what she kept telling herself. She had come because one of her students had won an art competition being exhibited at the festival. That was the official reason. The completely unrelated possibility that a certain firefighter might also be somewhere nearby was purely coincidental, or so she insisted. Olivia didn't believe a word of it. You've changed your earrings 3 times. I'm matching the weather. You've also checked your reflection in 6 shop windows. They're very reflective windows. And you've been staring at every firefighter who walks past. Ruby sighed dramatically. I am supporting public safety. Olivia folded her arms. You have a crush. I do not. You absolutely do. I don't even know his last name. That has never stopped anyone. Ruby rolled her eyes, but she couldn't hide the smile tugging at the corners of her lips. Maybe Olivia wasn't completely wrong. She wasn't looking for him because he was handsome. Although, he definitely was. She wasn't looking for him because he had a nice smile. Although, that smile had crossed her mind more than once. She kept thinking about him because, for reasons she still couldn't explain, no one had ever made her feel so comfortable after only a few minutes. An hour later, Ruby wandered into the outdoor marketplace carrying another cup of hot chocolate. I refuse to spill this one, she whispered to herself. She took exactly 3 careful steps. Someone spoke behind her. So, still destroying hot chocolate? Ruby froze. She turned around. There he was, dark jacket, easy smile. Hands buried inside his pockets. Mason. She laughed before she could stop herself. Only professionally. I've improved since Christmas. I'll believe that when I see evidence. She held up the perfectly untouched drink. Exhibit A. He leaned closer to inspect it. So far, so good. I've been holding it for almost 2 minutes. A new personal record. She nudged his shoulder. I liked you better when you were rescuing people. I am. He pointed at the cup. I'm preventing another disaster. She laughed so hard she nearly proved him right. They ended up walking through the festival together without either of them suggesting it. 1 minute they were talking beside a chocolate stand. The next, they were sampling handmade truffles from a local bakery, then cinnamon cookies, then caramel popcorn. At one booth, the owner insisted every couple should spin a giant prize wheel. Ruby immediately protested. We're not. Before she finished, the elderly woman smiled knowingly. Oh, sweetheart. They all say that. Mason glanced sideways at Ruby. I think arguing will only make this take longer. Ruby sighed. I hate when reasonable people are right. They spun the wheel together. It landed on a tiny stuffed bear wearing a red scarf. The vendor handed it to Mason. For your girlfriend. Both of them answered at exactly the same time. She's not, he's not. They looked at each other, then burst into laughter. The vendor winked. You'll figure it out. As they walked away, Mason handed Ruby the bear. I think he likes you better. Ruby hugged the tiny bear dramatically. Excellent. My first Valentine's gift. From a complete stranger. Technically, you know my first name. She smiled. Fair point. The afternoon slipped by effortlessly. They watched street musicians, shared one funnel cake, argued over whether powdered sugar counted as snow. It didn't feel like a date. Neither of them called it one. Neither of them needed to. There was no pressure, no awkward silence. Only the strange comfort of discovering conversation came easily, as though they had known each other longer than 2 accidental meetings. Eventually, Ruby reached into her coat pocket. I almost forgot. She pulled out the tiny silver Christmas bell. I never officially returned this. Mason smiled. I thought you already did. I brought it today just in case. She held it toward him. At exactly that moment, a little boy raced between them chasing a balloon. Ruby instinctively stepped aside. The bell slipped from her fingers. It bounced once, twice, then rolled directly into a storm drain. Both of them stared in horror. Ruby covered her mouth. No, 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 no. I cannot believe I just did that. Mason walked over and crouched beside the drain. The tiny silver bell had become trapped just beyond reach. Ruby knelt beside him. I'm officially the worst person you've ever met. I've met people who set kitchens on fire trying to microwave soup. That's oddly specific. It happened. She sighed. Doesn't make me feel much better. They searched for a solution. A nearby shop owner offered a coat hanger. Someone else brought a flashlight. A little girl volunteered a bubble wand because she believed it could catch anything. Ruby thanked her very seriously. I'm adding that to Plan B. Mason carefully bent the wire into a tiny hook. For the next 10 minutes, 2 grown adults lay on the sidewalk trying to rescue a bell the size of a marble. People walking past slowed down to watch. One teenager whispered, I really hope they're engaged. Ruby heard him. We're rescuing Christmas. The teenager nodded thoughtfully. Honestly, that makes sense. Mason finally caught the tiny loop attached to the bell. Very carefully, he lifted it through the narrow opening. When it finally landed safely in Ruby's palm, both of them cheered loud enough for strangers nearby to applaud. Ruby laughed until tears filled her eyes. "I almost lost it." Mason looked at the little bell for a long moment, then gently clipped it back onto the zipper of his jacket. The tiny silver bell jingled softly. He looked unexpectedly thoughtful. "My mom gave this to me." Ruby's smile faded into something gentler. "Really?" "The day I graduated from the fire academy." He touched the bell almost absent-mindedly. She said, "As long as I hear this little bell when you walk through the front door, I'll know you made it home safely." His voice carried a quiet warmth Ruby hadn't heard before. "She bought it at a Christmas market almost 15 years ago. I've worn it every shift since." Ruby looked at the tiny ornament with completely different eyes. Until that moment, it had simply been a funny souvenir from an awkward first meeting. Now, it felt like something far more precious. She smiled softly. "I'm glad we didn't lose it." "So am I." For the first time, she saw a different side of Mason. Not just the firefighter who joked about spilled hot chocolate. Not just the calm man who always smiled before running toward emergencies. She saw someone's son. Someone who still carried a small gift from his mother every single day. Someone who quietly held on to the people he loved, without making a show of it. The discovery touched her more deeply than she expected. As the afternoon sun dipped behind the mountains, they continued strolling through the festival. Neither of them noticed how much time had passed, or how naturally they had begun walking side by side. The funny thing was, Ruby had come to the Valentine Festival expecting to enjoy the decorations. Instead, she left carrying something much more dangerous: curiosity, because she was beginning to realize there was far more to Mason Reed than calm smiles, quick jokes, and firefighter uniforms. And for the first time, she genuinely wanted to know the man behind them. By the time summer arrived, Ruby had stopped pretending she never thought about the firefighter from Christmas. She thought about him whenever someone ordered hot chocolate, whenever she heard a small bell, whenever one of her students drew a firefighter with a red cape and insisted it was more realistic. She still didn't know his name. In her phone notes, she had simply written, "Firefighter guy." There was no number beneath it, no address, just a name that wasn't really a name at all. Still, somehow, he had become difficult to forget. Leavenworth's Summer River Festival arrived in June. The Christmas lights were gone, the snow had melted, green hills surrounded the town, and colorful kayaks drifted along the Wenatchee River. Ruby volunteered to help supervise a children's art booth near the water. By late afternoon, one of the other volunteers convinced her to join a beginner kayaking race. Ruby confidently agreed. She had never been kayaking before. That detail seemed unimportant at the time. It became significantly more important approximately 4 minutes later. Ruby paddled in the wrong direction, spun twice, nearly collided with a floating marker, then attempted to wave at a group of cheering children while still holding the paddle. The kayak tilted. Ruby froze. No. The boat tilted farther. No, no. She fell directly into the river. The children cheered as though this had been the planned entertainment. Ruby surfaced, sputtering and pushing wet hair from her face. "I'm fine." She lifted one arm. "I meant to do that." A man standing near the safety dock immediately jumped into the water. He reached her within seconds and steadied the overturned kayak. Ruby looked at him, then groaned. "You have got to be kidding me." The firefighter wiped water from his eyes. "So," he looked at the floating paddle, "still creating public emergencies?" "Only professionally," he laughed. "You've expanded beyond beverages. I'm growing as a person." He helped her reach the dock. Both of them climbed out completely soaked. Ruby looked at his dripping clothes. "I'm sorry. You didn't ask me to jump in. You didn't give me time. I was doing very well." "You were upside down. That's one interpretation." He laughed again. A volunteer handed them towels. Ruby wrapped one around her shoulders. "You always appear when I'm embarrassing myself. Maybe you're only embarrassing yourself when I'm nearby." She narrowed her eyes. "That sounds like blame." "It's more of a scientific theory." They spent the next hour sitting in the sun while their clothes dried. Ruby bought lemonade as compensation. He insisted she still owed him chocolate. She argued that rescuing him from an ordinary afternoon should count as repayment. Neither won. Neither wanted the conversation to end. When the festival closed, they walked toward the parking area together. For the third time that year, they stood only a few feet apart, waiting for someone to ask the obvious question. Neither did. A fire department truck pulled up. One of his coworkers leaned out the window. "Ready?" The firefighter glanced toward Ruby. "I have to go." She smiled. "Of course you do." He opened the truck door, then paused. "Try to stay out of rivers. No promises." They met again on the 4th of July. This time, Ruby was convinced it could no longer be an accident. She had gone to the lakeside fireworks show with Olivia. He was there helping with event safety. They noticed each other across the crowd at almost the same moment. Ruby lifted one eyebrow. He smiled and pointed toward the ground, silently asking whether she planned to fall into anything. She shook her head, then immediately tripped over a picnic blanket. He reached her before she hit the grass. Impressive. Ruby looked up from his arms. "You distracted me. I was standing 50 feet away. Very distracting distance." They found a quiet place beside the lake. For once, his radio remained silent. They shared kettle corn and watched children run through the grass holding glowing bracelets. When the fireworks began, the entire sky exploded with red, white, and gold. Ruby sat beside him, their shoulders almost touching. Neither looked at the other. Both were painfully aware of the small distance between them. Ruby wanted to say something, anything. She considered asking his name. She considered asking whether he was seeing someone. She considered simply taking his hand. Instead, she offered him more popcorn. He accepted. Neither confessed anything. When the final firework disappeared, his radio called him back to the safety area. Again, they separated without exchanging names. Ruby watched him walk away and wondered how two people could keep finding each other, yet remain complete strangers. Halloween arrived next. Ruby attended the town costume festival, dressed as a silver-haired fortune teller. A purple cloak covered her shoulders. Glittering stars surrounded her eyes. A dark wig made her almost unrecognizable. She found firefighter Guy near a first aid tent. This time, he walked straight past her. Ruby stared after him, then smiled mischievously. She stepped into his path and lowered her voice. "I can predict your future." He stopped politely. "Can you? You're going to meet a beautiful woman. That sounds suspiciously specific. She'll probably spill something on you." He narrowed his eyes. Ruby struggled not to laugh. "She may also fall into a river." Recognition slowly appeared on his face. "Hot chocolate disaster?" Ruby pulled off the wig. "You didn't recognize me. You look like you sell cursed jewelry. That was the goal. I'm impressed. You should be ashamed. I rescued you from a river. That was months ago. I believe gratitude should last longer." Ruby pulled out her Polaroid camera. "We need evidence." "Of what?" "That you exist outside Christmas." She moved beside him and raised the camera. He leaned closer. Their faces barely fit inside the frame. The flash went off. Ruby waited as the photograph slowly developed. The image appeared. Her ridiculous silver makeup, his crooked smile, their shoulders pressed together. It was the first picture they had ever taken. Ruby stared at it longer than necessary. "We look surprisingly normal. You're dressed like a fortune teller." "Normal is relative." She handed him the photograph. He shook his head. "You keep it." "Why?" "Because you notice things worth remembering." The sentence caught her off guard. She carefully placed the Polaroid inside her coat. A parade began moving through the street. Costumed families flooded the square. Music grew louder. Children surrounded them. Ruby looked away for only a second. When she turned back, he was gone. She pushed through the crowd, looked near the first aid tent, the food stalls, the parade route. Nothing. For several minutes, disappointment settled heavily inside her. Again, another meeting, another unfinished goodbye. She was beginning to wonder whether this was all they would ever be. Two people who kept appearing, then disappearing. The crowd finally thinned near the end of the street. Ruby heard footsteps behind her. "There you are." She turned. He stood beneath a row of orange lanterns, slightly out of breath. "I thought I lost you." Ruby laughed softly. "I think the universe likes making fun of us." He walked closer. "I think," His expression softened. We're just really bad at saying goodbye. The joke faded between them. Ruby looked at the man she had met at Christmas, then Valentine's Day, then summer, then the 4th of July, now Halloween. Enough. She stepped closer. So, he waited. What's your name? For a moment, he looked almost surprised. Then he smiled and extended his hand. Mason. Mason Reed. Ruby accepted his hand. Warm, steady, finally real. She smiled. I'm Ruby. Ruby Collins. His fingers remained around hers for a second longer than necessary. Ruby, he repeated, as though he had been waiting months to say it. She laughed. It's nice to finally meet you. Mason smiled. I was beginning to think we never would. For the first time since Christmas, they were no longer firefighter guy and hot chocolate disaster. They had names, a photograph, and 5 unexpected meetings that were becoming increasingly difficult to call accidents. Another December arrived, exactly 1 year after Ruby Collins had first crashed into a firefighter carrying 2 cups of hot chocolate. Only this Christmas, nothing was accidental anymore. Ruby submitted her Christmas Eve vacation request before anyone else at school had even started thinking about holiday plans. Her principal smiled as he signed the form. You really love Christmas. Ruby smiled back. I do. That wasn't a lie. It simply wasn't the complete truth anymore. Because this year, she wasn't just looking forward to Christmas, she was looking forward to someone. Across town, Mason Reed walked into the fire station carrying a cup of coffee. His captain looked up from the duty roster and laughed before Mason even opened his mouth. No. Mason blinked. What? I already know. The festival district? Mason smiled sheepishly. I was hoping. It's yours. You didn't even let me ask. His captain folded his arms. You've somehow volunteered for downtown every major festival this year. Valentine's, summer, 4th of July, Halloween. He grinned. You think I haven't noticed? Mason rubbed the back of his neck. I suppose I wasn't very subtle. Not even a little. His captain picked up the clipboard. You know, you could just ask her out, like a normal person. Mason laughed. I think I've been doing that all year. Christmas Eve, Leavenworth, 8:20 p.m. Snow drifted gently through the glowing streets. The giant Christmas tree stood proudly in the center of the square. Children laughed. Carolers sang beside the church. The familiar hot chocolate stand was exactly where it had always been. Ruby arrived first. She looked around, smiled, then bought 2 cups. 1 minute later, a familiar voice behind her said, You've learned. She turned. Mason stood there, hands in his jacket pockets, smiling exactly the way she remembered. I wasn't taking any chances. She handed him one of the drinks. No collisions this year. I'm almost disappointed. You'll survive. I probably will. This time, neither of them wandered aimlessly. They already knew each other's favorite places, favorite pastries, favorite Christmas songs. They visited them all without discussing the route, as if they had rehearsed it. The evening felt strangely peaceful, not because anything exciting happened, but because nothing needed to. For the first time, they weren't waiting for another accidental meeting. They had chosen to be there, together. They eventually stopped beneath the enormous Christmas tree, where everything had begun. Snowflakes landed softly on Ruby's red scarf. Mason looked at her. You know, I've been wondering about something. What? How many Christmases were actually accidents? Ruby looked away, pretending to think. I have a confession. I'm listening. She laughed softly. The truth is, I started checking the festival schedule back in January, so I'd know exactly when to come. I told everyone I loved the decorations. She smiled. I was hoping I'd see you. For one long moment, Mason simply stared at her. Then he laughed. Not because it was funny, because it suddenly explained everything. What? Ruby asked. He shook his head. I've got a confession too. Oh? I've spent the entire year trading shifts, so I could cover every festival downtown. She blinked. You did? I kept pretending it was because I liked crowd control. Ruby laughed. You don't? I tolerate crowd control, but I looked forward to running into one particular art teacher. She covered her face. We're ridiculous. A little. She looked at him. He looked at her. Then both of them started laughing so hard that several nearby tourists turned around to see what was happening. When they finally caught their breath, Mason smiled. "So, we've both been cheating fate." Ruby nodded. "I guess we have." For the first time, the mystery disappeared. It hadn't been fate keeping them together all year. It had quietly become choice. One festival after another, one excuse after another, until eventually, neither of them needed excuses anymore. The church bells rang. Christmas music drifted through the square. Mason reached into the pocket of his jacket. There was one more thing. Ruby immediately smiled. "The bell?" He nodded. She watched as he unclipped the tiny silver Christmas bell from his zipper. The same bell she had picked up from the snow 1 year earlier. The same bell they had nearly lost in the storm drain on Valentine's Day. He placed it gently into her hands. "I think this belongs to both of us now." Ruby smiled. "I thought you wanted it back." "I do, but not like that." He nodded toward the ornament. "Open it." She frowned. "It opens?" He smiled. "It always has." Very carefully, Ruby twisted the tiny bell. It separated into 2 delicate halves. Hidden inside, rested a diamond ring. She looked up, speechless. Mason took a slow breath. "The first time we met, I thought fate interrupted us." Snow continued falling around them. He smiled gently. "Now I think it was simply giving us enough reasons to keep coming back." Ruby felt tears gathering before she realized she was crying. She laughed through them. "Good." He tilted his head. "Why?" She stepped closer. "Because I was done waiting after Valentine's." Before he could kneel, before he could even ask the question he had practiced for weeks, Ruby reached for the front of his firefighter jacket, pulled him toward her, and kissed him. The Christmas market exploded into applause. Children cheered. Someone shouted, "It's about time." A violinist immediately switched to a romantic Christmas song. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were laughing. Both of them were crying just a little. Mason looked at her with mock seriousness. "So," he smiled. "Can I finally have your phone number?" Ruby pulled her phone from her pocket. "No," he blinked. "No?" She laughed. "You can have something better." She slipped the phone back into her coat, then reached for his hand, interlacing their fingers. "My future." For perhaps the first time in his life. Mason Reed had absolutely no clever response. He simply smiled and held her hand a little tighter. 1 year later, Christmas Eve returned once more. The square glowed exactly as it always had. Snow covered the rooftops. The church bells echoed through the valley. Ruby and Mason walked hand in hand beneath the lights. She carried 2 cups of hot chocolate. "I've got this." Mason smiled. "I've heard that before. I mean it this time." At that exact moment, a little girl bumped into Ruby's elbow. Hot chocolate splashed directly across the front of Mason's coat. Silence. Ruby slowly looked down, then up. "Oops," Mason sighed dramatically. "You know, I think this is becoming a tradition." Ruby laughed. "No." She slipped her arm through his. "It's becoming our story." Together they disappeared into the glowing Christmas crowd. The camera slowly pulled back. The church bells rang once more. Snow continued falling across the square where 2 strangers had once collided by accident. Far away, inside the cozy little home they now shared, a Christmas tree stood beside the living room window. Hanging near the center was a tiny silver Christmas bell. No longer just a keepsake from an awkward first meeting, no longer simply a gift from Mason's mother. Now, it represented every unexpected festival, every almost goodbye, every reason they had found to keep returning. Because sometimes love doesn't arrive once and stay forever. Sometimes it patiently finds its way back, through missed chances and unfinished conversations, until 2 people finally stop waiting for fate and choose each other for every season that follows. Sometimes, the greatest love stories don't begin with a grand confession. They begin with small moments that almost seem too ordinary to matter. A spilled cup of hot chocolate, a tiny silver bell, a few unexpected conversations, and the quiet decision to keep showing up. Ruby and Mason spent an entire year believing fate kept bringing them back together. In the end, they discovered something even more beautiful. Fate may open the door, but love grows when 2 people choose to walk through it, again and again. Imagine meeting the same person at different moments throughout a single year, always thinking it was just another coincidence. At what point would you stop calling it fate and finally admit you wanted to see them too? We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Do you believe some people are destined to cross your path again and again, or do you think love only happens when someone finally chooses to take the first step? If this story made you smile, please subscribe to Soul Stirring Stories and joining us for more heartfelt journeys filled with love, hope, second chances, and unforgettable endings. Until our next story, take care of your heart, because sometimes the smallest moments become the beginning of the greatest love story of your life.